The corset bit deeper with every breath. Clara Mayfield stood near the edge of the harvest ball floor, blinking hard to keep her vision steady as a swell of laughter rose from the spinning dancers. Her hands trembled around a lace fan, its ivory handle slick with sweat, though the chill in the great barn-turned ballroom clung to her bare shoulders like frost. The music was bright, the candles plentiful, the ribbons and banners dancing in the autumn air, but none of that reached her. Her left side throbbed in time with the music, each beat a hot pulse beneath layers of silk and taffeta. She'd tried stuffing a folded cloth between the bone and the corset's edge, but it shifted when she bent to put on her shoes, and now the bruised rib screamed every time she stood straight. Smile. Silas Vaughan's voice slid like grease against her ear. The sour tang of whiskey rolled off his breath. From a distance he looked like a concerned guardian, his hand resting lightly on her back, but Clara knew better. His thumb pressed into the spot just below her rib, where purple and yellow bloomed under the fabric. She didn't flinch. She'd learned better. "Fitch is watching," Silas muttered. "Mining money, Clara. More than your mother ever dreamed of. Smile like you got a secret worth keeping." "I'm trying," she whispered. "Try harder." She breathed in shallow and lifted her chin. Her eyes flicked toward the corner where Walter Fitch stood in a dark brown frock coat, fingering the gold watch chain that looped across his belly. 60 years old, gray-bearded, and chewing a toothpick, like he'd rather be inspecting a mine shaft than attending a ball. He caught her gaze and knotted lips, stretching in a thin smile. Clara swallowed. Her stomach turned. "Here he comes," Silas hissed, straightening beside her. Walter approached with a slight limp hand outstretched like he was reaching for a shovel, not a girl. "Miss Mayfield," he croaked. "Might I have the pleasure?" Clara glanced down at his hand, broad, trembling slightly, and then back up at Silas. One cage for another. But at least the new one wouldn't come with bruises. Maybe just silence and cold. "The pleasure's mine, Mr. Fitch," she said, her voice even careful. Silas's grip released. The dance floor opened for them like a trap. Walter's steps were heavy, his rhythm off, but Clara followed, biting her lip as the movement jarred her side. The music was loud fiddles and banjos riding over the chatter of Silver Birch's finest. Her boots slid on the polished floorboards as she was spun hard and sudden. Pain seared up her spine. She forced a smile. A miner's wife. Safe. Quiet. Walter leaned in. "You're pale, miss." "Ill-just excitement," she breathed, barely getting the words out. Her lungs didn't want to open. Not enough space in the corset. Not enough room between the ribs. The faces around her blurred, flickering lamps, swirling skirts, hats, and grins and shadows. The scent of roasted venison clung to the air, layered with perfume and candle wax. Somewhere Silas was watching. She could feel it. The weight of his expectations pressed harder than the corset stays. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. A sudden twist. Her vision burst white. A sound cracked inside her, something shifting, something tearing. The pain was no longer sharp, but consuming like flame over skin. She tried to breathe and got nothing. The floor swayed underfoot, the fiddles screeched, or maybe that was her. Her legs gave way. She didn't stumble. She fell hard, folding like a rag doll. A gasp rippled across the ballroom. The music faltered, the bow of the lead fiddler skidding to a halt. The silence rang louder than any note. Clara lay against the floorboards, the cool pressing into her cheek. Her chest fluttered, no longer rising right. She heard footsteps, gasps, someone shouting. "She's fainted. She's just delicate," another voice said. "Silas, get her up." She tried to move her hands, twitching against the floor, but her limbs betrayed her. "Please." Just let the floor open up and take me. A hand touched her shoulder. Her body braced for the sharp pull, the anger behind Silas's fingers, but it didn't come. Back away. The voice was low, solid, final. Then arms, warm, strong, smelling faintly of horse and leather, slid under her. "You're all right," the man murmured. "I've got you." Clara blinked against the light above. A face came into focus. Harsh jawline, gray eyes like mountain stone, broad shoulders. He wasn't dressed like the others. His dark coat was tailored, but worn dust clinging to the cuffs. A black hat tilted back on his head. Rancher Eli McAllister. She knew the name. Everyone in Silver Birch did. Owner of more land than any man in 3 counties. Not a man for parties. Not a man for much of anything but fences, cattle, and silence. "I said back away," Eli repeated, and this time the crowd obeyed. His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. She felt the shift in the room like wind changing directions. Silas was close. She could smell the sharp stink of fear and liquor on him. "She's my ward," Silas barked. "Let me handle, you've done enough," Eli said. His voice was so calm it was terrifying. Then she was rising, carried like she weighed nothing. Her head lolled against his chest, hair tumbling from its pins. "I'll take her to the range," Eli said to no one and everyone. "You can't just," Silas stammered. "If she goes back with you tonight, she won't wake up tomorrow," Eli cut in, never slowing. "Do you understand me?" The barn doors opened. Cold air rushed in, biting her skin, but it felt clean. Honest. Clara tried to speak, tried to tell him not to waste his time. She was ruined already. The weight of her would be a burden soon, but the words stuck in her throat, drowned by pain. She let her eyes close again, drifting against the steady rhythm of a heartbeat that wasn't hers. "You're safe now," he said. And for the first time in years, she wondered if it could be true. "You brought a storm into this house," Eli Aunt Coralie warned. "But sometimes storms wash filth clean." The wind whipped up from the valley floor as Eli McAllister rode hard across the dark prairie, Clara Mayfield tucked against his chest, barely conscious. Her hair tangled in the buttons of his coat, her lips pale as the moonlight. Each time the horse jolted over a rut, her breath hitched shallow, pained, ragged. "See," he muttered to the horse, pulling back slightly. He leaned forward just enough to shield her from the chill. Her weight in his arms was shockingly slight. Bones and silk, that's all she was. The range came into view, black timbers and slate shingles rising against the dark backdrop of the Absarokas. The house lights burned through the cold like beacons. Hattie Boone met him at the front steps, apron, fluttering lantern raised high. "Lord in heaven, what happened?" "She collapsed at the harvest ball," Eli said, dismounting with Clara still in his arms. "She's hurt." Inside, Hattie ordered, already turning. "Parlor sofa. I'll stoke the fire." Eli crossed the threshold. Warmth hit him in the face, heavy with wood smoke and sage. He laid Clara gently on the settee beside the hearth. Her head lolled. One hand slid down, fingers trembling. "She's burning up," he said, kneeling, "but her skin's cold." "Shock, maybe," Hattie said, pulling back the blanket she'd fetched. "Doc Cray's closer to town. I'll send young Del Rey on horseback." Eli nodded once. Hattie moved fast, pouring water, unfastening buttons, carefully peeling away the heavy satin dress. Beneath the stays and petticoats, the bruises bloomed. Black, deep plum. A twisted smear of yellow across her ribs, and higher up, thumb-shaped marks along her arms, a fading welt on the side of her neck. Eli stood still, jaw clenched. He'd seen cattle beat cleaner than this. "Sweet mercy," Hattie whispered. How was she even standing? "She wasn't," Eli said quietly. Footsteps clattered in the hallway. "What is this chaos?" Aunt Coralie's voice snapped like a whip. I heard, "Oh!" She stopped dead in the parlor doorway, her graying bun slightly askew, traveling cloak still draped over one shoulder. Hattie turned. "You may want to brace yourself, ma'am." Aunt Coralie stepped closer, her expression hardening, then softening, then breaking. "I know that girl," she said after a moment. "That's Clara Mayfield, Silas Vaughan's ward. What on earth have you done?" "Eli kept her alive," he said. "You carried her out of a ball in front of half the county and brought her here. Unmarried without a chaperone, the tongues will wag till Sunday. I'd rather them wag than write her obituary." Coralie opened her mouth, closed it. Her eyes dropped to the bruises. She stepped closer and adjusted the blanket over Clara's shoulders. "She needs a doctor," she said, "and a full stomach. And silence. I sent for Cray." Hattie said, "He'll be here within the hour." Coralie turned to Eli, arms folded. "This isn't just a stray dog you pulled out of a ditch, nephew. You brought a storm into this house. You'd best be prepared for the lightning." Eli said nothing. He stood by the fire and watched the flames spit and curl. Clara moaned softly, her face twisting. A clock ticked. Wind rattled the windows. Half an hour passed before Doc Ezra Cray barreled through the front door, half frozen, dragging his black bag. He grumbled under his breath as he entered the parlor, but the second he saw Clara, he sobered. "She's been worked over," he said, bending close. "When within the last 24 hours, Hattie said. Cray gently touched her side. Clara jerked and cried out, even in her sleep. "Ribs," he muttered. "Likely fractured. Maybe more." He peeled away more of the shift, revealing older wounds, cigarette burns on her shoulder, scarring down the spine. Eli's knuckles went white against the mantel. Cray worked fast, set her ribs with binding cloth, mixed laudanum with warm broth. Hattie wiped Clara's brow with cool water as Coralie unpacked a fresh nightgown from upstairs. When Cray finished, he stood and turned to Eli. "She's lucky she dropped when she did. Another turn in that dance and a rib might have punctured a lung." The corset forced the break inward. "She going to make it?" Eli asked. Cray nodded slowly. "With rest, food, time." And Silas Cray's lip curled. "If I had my way, I'd string the bastard up. That makes two of us." Hattie adjusted the blanket. "She won't be leaving anytime soon. That much is clear." Aunt Coralie pressed her fingers to her temples. "Well, if she's staying here under this roof, she'll need more than bandages. She'll need a reason. Do you know what it looks like to bring an unmarried girl here in the dead of night?" Eli looked at Clara. Her skin was pallid, but her chest rose and fell evenly now. The pain had quieted. For the moment. "I know," he said. "You've already made a scene. They'll say you're keeping a mistress out here. They can say what they want." Coralie walked up to him, lowering her voice. "If she stays, Eli, she becomes your responsibility in every way. Socially, legally, I understand. No, I don't think you do." Her eyes narrowed. "A storm's coming. Don't pretend you can outrun it." He glanced at Clara again, this girl who had collapsed in his arms, who had flinched even while unconscious, who bore the marks of evil carved into skin that never had a chance to stay soft. Let them talk. He'd built this house with stone and steel. It could weather the storm. In the hallway beyond the parlor, the long shadows stretched across the floor, and the fire crackled behind him. Somewhere beyond the mountains, the sky began to lighten, pale gray before the dawn. "Let them wag their tongues," Eli said. "Let them guess. But that girl is staying here." Coralie stared at him for a long beat. "Very well," she said. "But understand, if she stays, your life changes, Eli. Permanently." Eli turned away from her toward the window. Outside, the wind picked up again, tearing through the range grass and rattling the frost-heavy fences. Inside, Clara stirred in her sleep. He watched her chest rise, fall, then rise again. "She is a map of survival, not a ruin," Doc Cray muttered. "And I'd like to meet the beast who drew it." Clara woke to the soft ticking of a clock and the scent of something clean, lavender maybe, or pine soap. Her head was pressed into a feather pillow, and the room was wrapped in quiet warmth. Somewhere a fire crackled. She blinked up at the wooden beams above and forgot for a heartbeat where she was. Then her ribs pulled tight, and the pain returned like a knife, dull-edged but deep. She gasped, hand going to her side, but the bandages were there, neat, firm, and not her doing. She turned her head and saw an old armchair drawn up beside the bed, empty now. A quilt lay across her legs, hand-stitched and worn soft with age. A new room. Not the cellar. Not the pantry floor. Not Silas's house. She breathed in, slow. McAllister's ranch. The last thing she remembered was falling her knees, giving out the lights above her, blurring into white, then the voice. "You're safe now." She tried to sit up, but the ache in her ribs snapped her back against the pillows. The door opened softly. Hattie Boone stepped inside, carrying a cup of something warm. She was sturdy, with gray-streaked hair pinned back and a face that looked like it had weathered a few harsh winters without complaint. "Well, you're awake. Took your time, sweetheart," she said, setting the cup on the nightstand. "Doc said you'd be groggy. Laudanum and cracked ribs don't mix well." Clara tried to speak, but her throat was dry. She licked her lips, water. Hattie passed her a glass and helped her lift it with gentle hands. Where Clara rasped. "Where is he, Mr. McAllister, outside?" "Fence check, I expect. He doesn't sit still for long." Clara closed her eyes for a moment. The fire popped. Hattie sat in the chair beside her and folded her arms. "Doc Cray came straight here, looked you over head to toe, told us what we already suspected." Clara swallowed, her fingers tightening on the quilt. "He said..." Hattie's voice softened. "He said your injuries weren't new, not all of them. Said you've had more than your share of pain, and it wasn't from no fall down the stairs." Clara turned her face toward the wall. "I don't want to talk about it. I know." There was no judgment in Hattie's tone, just quiet understanding. "He also said something else," she went on after a beat. "Said, she is a map of survival, not a ruin. Said he'd like to meet the beast who drew it." Clara didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat tightened. "Well," Hattie said, standing, smoothing her apron, "we're not in the habit of letting beasts in this house. You'll be safe here. For now, you focus on breathing easy and eating something that sticks to your bones." She left the room, the door closing softly behind her. Clara stayed still, the words circling in her mind like dry leaves in a wind. A map of survival, not a ruin. She didn't feel like either. She felt like paper left too long in the rain, wrinkled, fragile, torn through. But safe. She wasn't used to that feeling. It sat strange in her chest, like a coat she hadn't grown into yet. A few hours passed in the hush of the afternoon. She slept, woke, sipped broth. By dusk, the fire burned low and shadows danced on the ceiling beams. When the door opened again, it wasn't Hattie. Eli McAllister stepped inside, dust still on his coat hat in one hand. He stood there for a moment, his gray eyes scanning her face, then the untouched plate on the nightstand. "You're awake," he said simply. Clara nodded. "I'm not here to ask questions," he added, "or get answers." He took a step closer, then paused. "But I need to say this, no one in this house will lay a hand on you. Not me, not anyone. You eat when you want. You walk when you can. You speak if you feel like it. Clara stared at him. He didn't look away. Finally, she said, voice barely a whisper. Why? Eli blinked once. Why what? Why did you take me from the ball? Why not just let him drag me home? He seemed to think about that, eyes dropping to the rug, then lifting again. Because I've seen cattle with cleaner hides, he said. Because you were falling and no one else moved. Because… I don't know. Maybe because I could. Clara's eyes welled up unexpectedly. She looked away. Eli turned to go. I should wait. Her voice was soft, but it stopped him. She hesitated, then asked, Will Silas come here? His jaw set. He already tried. I turned him away. Her breath caught. He'll come back. I expect he will. She gripped the edge of the quilt. He doesn't forgive embarrassment. And you embarrassed him. He'll make you pay. Eli nodded once, slowly. Let him try. The calm in his voice scared her more than shouting would have. He stepped out of the room, and again she was left with firelight and silence. But this time the quiet didn't gnaw at her so much. She closed her eyes and drifted off again. In the hallway, Hattie was waiting. You told her, I told her, Eli said. She asked about Silas. She's scared. Not just of what he's done, but what he'll do next. Hattie gave a short sigh. She's right to be. That man's poison. Eli nodded. If he comes again, we'll be ready. Hattie looked toward the closed door. She doesn't need you to fight all her battles, Eli. I know. But she does need someone who'll stand still long enough to listen. Eli said nothing. Outside, the wind picked up again. Down in Silver Birch, the lamps were being lit. In town, rumors would already be blooming like mold Eli McAllister and the bruised girl he carried from the dance. Let them talk. The house was still. Upstairs, Clara stirred beneath the quilt-bruised ribs, pulling with every breath. She dreamed of cellars, of Silas's cane, of locked doors and words whispered through cracks in the floorboards. But when she woke, there was only firelight pinewood walls and the far-off creak of wind against the shutters, and the smell of fresh bread baking in the kitchen. If she's my wife, Eli said, then every hand raised against her is raised against me. The pounding came just before breakfast, hard enough to rattle the windows. Hattie set down her mixing bowl, flour dust still on her knuckles, and looked to Eli, who stood already at the door, sleeves rolled to his elbows. Clara had been awake early, trying to walk from the bed to the rocking chair beside the window. She heard it too, that knock. She froze halfway across the rug, hand on the wall, every bone in her body going cold. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Stay in your room, Eli said quietly, before stepping into the hallway. She heard the front door open, voices raised, hers included. Silas. Clara edged toward the door and pressed her ear to the wood. I'm not here to cause trouble. Silas was saying, the false civility in his voice already splintering. I'm here to collect what's mine. You're trespassing, Eli said flatly. She's my ward, legal and proper. Brought her up myself after her mother died. Took care of her when no one else would. You beat her bloody. You've got no proof of that. I've got a room full of it. A pause. I'll take her now, Silas said. No more fuss. Let the county sort it out. You're not taking her anywhere. She's not your kin, McAllister. She's not your wife. The silence after that was thick as a thundercloud. Then Eli's voice, low but steady. She is now. Clara's hand slipped from the doorknob. You what? Silas barked. I said, Eli repeated, voice louder this time, she's my wife. We were wed privately after the ball. You lie. You want to challenge me on it, in court, in church. You'll be the one with questions to answer. She's barely out of her sickbed. She's safer in that bed than she ever was in your house. The floor shifted under Clara's feet. She stumbled back into the rocking chair, breath short. He hadn't asked her, hadn't warned her, just said it like it was truth already carved in stone. Outside, Silas sputtered. You think marrying her saves you from this mess I don't need saving? She's a burden. You'll see it soon enough. I see a woman who deserves to sleep without fear, Eli said, and eat without flinching, and breathe without a corset choking her ribs black and blue. You got yourself a firecracker, Silas sneered. She'll burn your whole house down. She's not the one who brought fire to this door. The porch creaked. Clara imagined Silas stepping forward, face red, shoulders tight. You watch yourself, McAllister. This won't end with a handshake. It'll end with the law, and I'll be waiting. The door slammed shut. Boots thudded across the parlor. Clara eased herself back into bed before Eli could open her door. He did a few seconds later. You heard Clara nodded. You said we're married. I did. That's not true. Not yet. She looked up at him, eyes sharp despite the pallor in her face. You had no right. Maybe not, he said. But I wasn't about to hand you back over to a man who leaves bruises where love ought to be. She looked down at her hands. They were trembling. You just made me a scandal. Silas did that the day he laid a hand on you. She drew the quilt higher. You've ruined your name. He gave a humorless laugh. You think I built all this on gossip and grace? She didn't smile. Her voice was small when she asked. What if I don't want to marry you? Then we don't, Eli said. I'll fix the mess another way. Clara stared at the fire crackling in the hearth. Her heart beat wild in her chest. I'm tired of being traded like a cow, she said. You're not. Then why do I keep ending up on someone's ledger? Eli stepped into the room, took the chair beside her, and leaned forward. I don't want a ledger or a bargain. I want you safe. That's it. And if the town talks, let them talk. She searched his face. No pity, just steel and steadiness. Clara exhaled. Then what happens now? I wire the preacher. We do it quiet. Proper. You decide when. She turned back to the fire. Would it really stop him? It stops the courts from handing you back to him, Eli said. It makes you harder to touch. She didn't speak for a long while. Outside, the wind kicked up across the hills, and the trees swayed, groaning under the weight of the storm still gathering. Later that day, Aunt Coralie came into Clara's room with tea and a glare. You're too pretty to look like a ghost, she said, sitting without invitation. Eat something, or at least pretend to. Clara took the cup. You don't approve. Of the marriage, Clara nodded. I don't approve of liars or cowards, Coralie said. You're neither. As for Eli, he's got more sense than most and less patience than all. Which means if he's offered you his name, it's because he believes it's worth something. Clara sipped her tea. Coralie leaned in. And if you plan to wear it, you better stand tall enough to carry it. I didn't ask for this. None of us ask for storms, girl, but we still gotta walk through 'em. That night, Clara sat by the window watching lightning flicker in the far mountains. Rain tapped the glass. The bruises ached, but not the same way. Something else throbbed now, uncertainty, yes, but also something like breath. Real breath. Deep and clear. She heard boots outside her door, a pause, then footsteps retreating. Eli had passed by, likely checking that she was still breathing, still steady. She smiled faintly. Just a little. A storm had walked into this house, and maybe, just maybe, it had found a place to rest. But the wind outside was rising, and Clara knew Silas Vaughan wasn't done. Not yet. If I don't take this stand now, Clara whispered, then I'll be running the rest of my life. The church sat quiet beneath a gray sky, its white steeple casting a long shadow across the yard. Clara stood just outside the front doors, hands clasped, tight fingers trembling despite the mild morning air. Her borrowed dress was simple sky blue cotton, cinched at the waist, with a lace collar someone had stitched by hand. Her bruises had faded enough to hide, but something deeper still throbbed beneath the surface. The preacher was already inside. Aunt Coralie had gone ahead to handle the details. The small crowd had been kept to a bare few, just the ranch hands Eli trusted, Miss Alma from the mercantile, and the preacher's wife. Clara's eyes lifted as Eli stepped up beside her, hat in his hand, jaw set like granite. "You sure about this?" he asked. Clara swallowed hard. "No. But I'm doing it." He didn't smile, just nodded and offered his arm. She took it. The doors creaked as they entered the wooden pews, catching the light through the stained glass windows. Dust motes danced in the quiet beams, and the hush of the sanctuary wrapped around her like a blanket stitched in silence and prayer. At the front stood Reverend Boone, a tall man with a narrow face and eyes like polished walnut. He gave Clara a nod, warm but not soft. He didn't pity her. That mattered more than he'd ever know. Eli's boots thudded gently on the pine floor as they stepped forward. When they stopped at the altar, Clara didn't look at the preacher. She kept her eyes on the worn wood beneath her shoes. "Before we begin," Reverend Boone said, "you both understand what this vow means." "I do," Eli said. Clara hesitated, then whispered, "Yes." The preacher looked between them. Marriage isn't a shelter from justice. It's not a shield against the past, but it can be a beginning. Clara's breath caught. He looked straight at her. "You don't have to be healed to be loved. You just have to be honest." Her lips parted, but no sound came. Eli reached for her hand. She gave it without flinching. The ceremony was short, simple. No songs, no rings, no flower petals down the aisle, just words, quiet promises, and the steady joining of two hands that had walked through fire to find a moment of peace. When it was done, they didn't kiss. Eli only nodded, and Clara squeezed his hand once before they turned to face the quiet room. The sun pushed through the clouds, just then streaking light across the preacher's Bible. Clara looked up at the beams and felt something in her chest loosen as if an invisible hand had unclenched its fist around her ribs. Outside, the small group gathered near the church steps. Alma handed her a wrapped loaf of honey bread. Coralie kissed her cheek. "You're braver than most," she whispered. "Don't forget it." Clara stood there a long moment as the others drifted off. She watched the wind stir the prairie grass beyond the fence line. Eli stood beside her, hands in his coat pockets. "You hungry?" he asked. "Not yet." He turned to face her fully. "You don't owe me anything, Clara. I know, but if you ever do want this for real, I'll let you know," she said. "But right now, I just need to be free." They rode back to the ranch in silence. The buggy wheels creaked over the dirt road and the sun warmed her knees. She leaned back against the seat, closing her eyes. But peace never lasted long. They arrived to find Sheriff Taggart's horse tied at the fence. Eli's face darkened as they stepped off the buggy. Taggart stood on the porch, hat in hand, eyes flicking between the two of them. "I came as soon as I heard," he said. "Vorn's made a filing at the courthouse in Billings." Eli stilled. "Filing what custodial claim? Says Clara's marriage was forced under duress. Claims she's mentally unfit to make decisions on her own." Clara's stomach turned. "I thought he was bluff," Eli said. Taggart shook his head. "Not this time. He's hired a lawyer from Helena. Got a hearing date set, Judge Rollins. That's in 2 weeks, less, the sheriff said. 10 days. Eli stepped forward. That man nearly beat her to death. He's got no right, I agree, Taggart said. But the law don't always move on the truth. Sometimes it moves on paper. Clara stepped between them, voice thin but steady. What do I do? You prepare, the sheriff said. You tell your story. You let folks hear it straight. I'm not strong enough. You've got 10 days to get strong. Clara turned away, chest rising and falling in quick gasps. Eli touched her shoulder gently. You don't have to go through it alone. She didn't answer. That night she sat by the fire, a pen in her hand and a blank sheet of paper in her lap. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Aunt Coralie poured coffee into a chipped mug and handed it to her. Start with the truth, she said. Then keep going until it stops hurting. Clara stared at the paper. Her mind was a tangle of voices, Silas shouting her own cries muffled in memory, the sound of the belt, the silence after each blow. But beneath it all was something else. The sound of Eli saying her name. The sound of the door slamming between her and the past. She dipped the pen in ink, wrote the date. Then my name is Clara Jane Whitlow McAllister. I was born in a thunderstorm. My mother said I cried louder than the wind. The rest would come. Outside, the wind howled across the hills. But this time the door was shut, and Clara married, or not bruised, or not wasn't running. Not anymore. I thought I'd buried her with my bruises, Clara whispered. But the woman I was, she's crawling back to life. The paper shook in Clara's hands, not from cold, but from memory. Ink smudged slightly where her fingers pressed too hard. Her hand cramped from writing into the night, but the letter was finished, 8 pages of raw confession truth, wrapped in pain, every syllable a thread in the unraveling of her silence. She stared at the last line, then slowly folded it into thirds. No fanfare, no tears. Just the quiet strength of a woman who'd spent too many years swallowing her voice. At the table, Aunt Coralie handed her a sealed envelope. Sheriff Taggart said he'd carry it to Billings himself. Says it'll reach the judge's clerk by morning. Clara gave a small nod, then pushed the letter inside and sealed it shut. Eli watched from the hearth arms, folded face unreadable. He hadn't asked to read what she wrote, and she hadn't offered. But when her fingers brushed his as she passed the envelope to Coralie, he squeezed gently just once. The wind outside had settled. Morning light stretched long and golden across the wooden floor. For the first time in days, the mountains felt like shelter, not exile. Ruthie left you something, Coralie said, rising. She disappeared into the pantry, returning with a small cedar box bound in twine. She meant to give it to you when you married. I didn't think it was the right time. Until now. Clara took the box into her lap. The smell of lavender and cedar drifted up as she tugged the twine free. Inside lay a collection of odd treasures, her mother's sewing thimble, a tiny glass horse she'd once played with as a child, and a folded ribbon from the county fair. And at the bottom, a letter. Clara unfolded the brittle paper, her mother's handwriting, delicate, looping, strong. Clara girl, if you're reading this, I reckon I'm watching from the clouds. You've always had a storm in you. Don't ever be ashamed of that. It means you feel the world honest. If you ever find a man who listens when you cry and doesn't flinch when you shout, don't let go too quick. And if you've fallen, I hope you rise. Because, my girl, you're made of the kind of iron God doesn't forge twice. Love always, Mama. The words hit Clara like thunder, low and rolling. She traced the ink with her thumb. I'd forgotten, she said softly. She used to braid my hair and tell me the wind was jealous of me. Eli moved to sit beside her. She sounds like she had good sense. She died with it. After she passed, it was just me and Ruthie. Then just me. Not anymore. Clara looked at him. It doesn't feel real. Then let it grow, he said. Like spring after a hard frost. Later that day, they walked the perimeter of the barn, checking boards that had come loose in the windstorm. Clara wore Eli's old work gloves, the fingers too long, the leather cracked and stiff. Her boots sank slightly into the thawing earth. The fence line needed mending, but Clara's mind wasn't on timber or nails. It was on the face of the man who used to yell from porch steps, the one who held her down and made her feel small in her own skin. I want to see where he filed that petition, she said suddenly. Eli paused. You want to go to the courthouse number? Just see the paper. Know what he said about me? He didn't argue. That evening, Sheriff Taggart rode back with the document in hand. Clara read it by lamplight, each accusation laid out in neat legal language. Her mental state. Her erratic behavior. The claim that Eli had manipulated her while she was under duress. That she was still married to Silas in the eyes of God. She handed the page back, her hands steady. That man used scripture like a switch, she muttered. I've heard enough of his gospel. Taggart raised an eyebrow. Want me to tell you what the judge really wants to see? Clara nodded. Consistency, details, show that you're stable, honest, and self-sufficient. I'm not self-sufficient. You are now, Coralie chimed in from the stove. You're working. You're writing. You're standing on your own feet. I'm sleeping in someone else's house. So build one, Eli said without hesitation. There's a plot behind the orchard. It was Ruthie's idea once. Clara blinked. You'd give me land. I'd give you the sky if it kept you free. The room went quiet. I'll think about it, Clara said. But that night she pulled out her journal and began sketching. Not blueprints, not numbers, just ideas, a small house with wide windows, a porch, swing, a room for books and light, a place that wasn't haunted. Morning came with a new letter. Eli found it tucked in his boot by the door. In Clara's neat handwriting, if the law wants to know who I am, they'll hear it straight. But I won't be defined by pain alone. I want to live, not just survive. And I want to earn my place, not have it handed to me. He read the last line twice. Thank you for seeing me before I saw myself. Outside, the sky was stretching itself awake. The horses stood quiet in the pasture. Coralie sang somewhere in the kitchen, the tune winding down the hallway like morning wind. Clara stepped out onto the porch, hair-braided cheeks flushed from sleep. She held her mother's cedar box, close fingers curling around the corners. I remembered something she said. When I was 8, I told Ruthie I wanted to be a woman who rode her own horse and slept under stars she picked herself. Eli grinned. Sounds about right. She looked at the dirt path leading away from the house. I think I'm going to testify in person. Eli didn't flinch. Then I'll ride with you. She glanced at him. I don't want to be saved, I know, but I wouldn't mind being walked beside. I've got a good horse. The wind caught the edge of her skirt. Clara stepped off the porch. The land felt different beneath her boots now, not a cage, but a place that might still hold something sacred. Not everything broken stayed broken. Some things like truth, like women with storms in their hearts, came back stronger. And Clara Whitlow McAllister was just getting started. I'm not running this time, Clara said, tying her braid tighter. Let the court hear every bruise I named in silence. The courthouse in Billings loomed taller than she remembered, a pale block of brick and authority framed by a gray sky. Clara adjusted the collar of her jacket as she stepped down from the wagon, her boots crunching into gravel, her stomach a hard knot under her ribs. Eli walked a few paces behind her, silent as a shadow, his hat low against the wind. He didn't reach for her, didn't crowd, just stayed near like a barn light that burned steady in a storm. Sheriff Taggart had arranged the time. Clara's testimony would be heard by Judge Wentworth himself, a stern man with salt-white hair and a reputation for knowing when someone was telling the truth or running from it. Coralie had packed a small bundle of snacks in brown waxed paper, but Clara hadn't eaten since dawn. She didn't want warmth or comfort. She wanted resolve. Inside, the hallways echoed with boot heels and muttered conversations. A clerk pointed them toward room 3B. The moment she stepped across the threshold, Clara felt the air change thicker somehow, like she had walked into a place where words had weight. Judge Wentworth sat behind a wide oak desk, glasses perched low on his nose, hands clasped. He glanced at the file. Mrs. Clara McAllister, yes, sir. You're here to contest the petition filed by Mr. Silas McAllister, who claims abandonment, infidelity, and emotional instability. Clara inhaled slowly. I am. Do you have counsel? No. Just truth. The judge nodded once, then motioned. Begin when you're ready. Clara stepped forward. She didn't look at the bailiff, didn't scan for Eli. She fixed her eyes on the edge of the desk and started. I married Silas McAllister when I was 19. I had one dress to my name, and the voice of my stepfather ringing in my ears, telling me I wasn't worth more. She told it plain. The nights without food, the mornings with bruises in hidden places, the scripture he'd quote when he raised his voice, the way he'd whisper, "No one will believe you." She didn't cry. Instead, she spoke like she was brushing dirt from bones that had lain buried for years. I left with nothing but my mother's brooch and a cracked Bible. I didn't commit adultery. I didn't vanish without reason. I survived. Judge Wentworth didn't interrupt once. He simply watched, quiet and still. I've found refuge, Clara continued. But I've also found work. I'm building something honest, something mine. And I want my name free from the man who tried to bury me under his version of God. When she finished, silence stretched out. Not hollow, but reverent. The judge folded his hands, tapping a finger against the file. Mrs. McAllister, you have no legal counsel, no financial statement, and no witnesses. I have Sheriff Taggart's notarized statement, and a letter from Dr. Hewitt at the county clinic. And this man outside, Mr. Eli Braddock, he's not my husband, but he's given me land to build a house. A gift. No, she said firmly. A promise. The judge arched a brow. You're a compelling speaker, Mrs. McAllister. Clara swallowed. I didn't know I was. He shuffled papers. You'll receive a written decision in the next 14 days. In the meantime, I advise you not to contact Mr. McAllister. If he contacts you, report it immediately. She nodded, breath shaky now that it was over. As she stepped out of the courtroom, the weight hit her. Her knees nearly gave, but Eli was there, solid and wordless. She didn't fall. Outside, snow began to drift lightly from the sky. Clara turned her face up to it. I didn't shake, she said half to herself. Eli brushed a bit of lint from her sleeve. You didn't. They stayed the night in a quiet boarding house on the edge of town. 2 separate rooms, both with thin walls and patchwork quilts that smelled of lavender soap. Clara sat by the window, staring out at the quiet town below. Her hands trembled not from fear, but release. She wrote a letter to Coralie, updating her, then folded it beside the parcel she'd packed for town Ruthie's, Thimble the ribbon, her mother's letter. They were going back with her, back home. The next morning, before the sun rose, Clara slipped a note under Eli's door. Come with me. There's something I need to see before we head back. He was waiting at the wagon when she stepped outside his coat, buttoned to the collar, the horses already hitched. They didn't talk as they drove. Just let the road hum beneath the wheels, the cold settling around them like an old friend. At the edge of Willow's Crossing, Clara pointed. "Turn there." Eli steered onto a dirt road that led to an old clapboard church. Paint peeled from the siding. The windows were clouded with age. Behind it, a field of gravestones lay quiet under thin snow. Clara climbed down and walked to the second row. Her mother's stone was there, simple and clean. Martha Ann Whitlow, 1950 to 1878. The wind bends to her stillness. Clara knelt, brushing away the snow with her gloves. "Mama, I spoke," she whispered. "I opened my mouth and didn't apologize for the sound it made." Behind her, Eli stood with his hat pressed to his chest. "I brought you here," Clara said, rising, "because I needed to leave her memory clean. Not tangled in pain. She'd be proud. She wouldn't believe it." Eli gave a slow smile. "Then it's time someone did." As they turned back toward the wagon, Clara's eyes caught movement up the ridge. A dark figure on horseback. She tensed. Eli noticed instantly. "Who is it? I don't know." The rider didn't come closer, just watched. A shape against the morning light. Clara reached into her coat, feeling the folded court letter still tucked inside. Her jaw tightened. "If he comes closer, I won't run. I'll be right here." She held his gaze. "That's not what I meant. I know." She mounted the wagon's shoulders, set heart steadier than it had been in years. Behind her, the wind picked up again, no longer mocking, but carrying something quiet and defiant. Clara didn't look back. Not at the church. Not at the rider. Only forward. Toward home. Toward the field where her house would rise. Toward the land that knew her not as a wife or runaway, but as a woman writing her own name across the earth. One plank. One word. One breath at a time. "I never asked to be rescued," Clara said. "I asked for a place to build, and you gave me that. Now let me build you a home worth staying in." The sun rose slower in late winter, dragging pale gold across the ridge like a curtain being pulled open, just a crack. Clara stood barefoot in the frost-lined cabin, a hammer in her hand, and the scent of sawdust in her lungs. Her fingers were numb, but her heart thudded steady. It had been 4 days since the courthouse, and the letter from Judge Wentworth had arrived that morning by courier. Final dissolution granted. No longer Mrs. Silas McAllister. No longer a shadow trailing someone else's name. Eli had handed her the envelope without a word, just nodded when her hands shook too hard to open it. They hadn't spoken much since then, not about the future or the past. But the air between them had shifted, no longer tight, with unspoken caution. Something warmer now. A growing silence that didn't feel empty. Clara reached for the beam above her, steadied the plank, and hammered again. The sound echoed sharp through the half-built home, each blow sealing her closer to the ground beneath her feet. Outside, she heard footsteps in the dirt. Then Eli's voice, low, steady. "I brought nails." She glanced over her shoulder. "Good." I was running low. He set them on the workbench, then stepped aside to let the sun hit the floor. The light reached across the room like a promise. "You're not slowing down," he said. "I'm not waiting." He smiled faintly, then leaned against the post. "This corner's crooked." She set the hammer down and crossed her arms. "Are you offering help or criticism? Depends. You want a porch that leans or one that holds?" Clara narrowed her eyes, then motioned toward the beam. "Then fix it." They worked in tandem, shoulder to shoulder. She measured. He lifted. The crack of wood splitting under pressure became rhythm, almost music. "I found your scarf," he said after a moment. "Which one?" "The green one." "Under the bench in the barn." She paused. I didn't know I lost it. You always drop things when you're distracted. I haven't had much time for distraction lately. Until now. Clara turned toward him. I know you mean well, but don't act like I've arrived. This house isn't finished. My life isn't either. I didn't say you had, but I think... He hesitated. I think you're not walking alone anymore. She looked down at the hammer in her hand. That frightens me more than starting over. Eli didn't flinch. Why? Because alone I know what to expect. But hope's unpredictable, and I've learned not to trust what looks like comfort. It's cost me. He stepped closer but didn't touch her. I'm not asking for anything in return. I'm just standing here. If that's all you can take, I'll stand here for as long as it takes. Clara swallowed the lump rising in her throat. That's what makes it worse. He raised an eyebrow. Because you mean it, she whispered. They worked until the shadows stretched long. That evening, Clara sat on the steps of the cabin, now framed and squared. Her fingers were stained with dirt and pitch, and her back ached, but she felt taller somehow. Eli joined her, handing her a cup of coffee. You think it'll hold? She asked, nodding toward the beams. Stronger than most things around here. She sipped in silence, then set the cup down. I want to build something for you too. He blinked. You already are. No, I mean something real. You gave me this land. You let me breathe again. But I don't want to be someone who just received a blessing and never gave one back. His gaze held hers, steady and warm. What are you offering, Clara? She drew a breath, then let it out slow. A home. One that stays open. One that remembers. One that has room for pain, but also joy. Not because I owe it to you, but because I want to build something that heals us both. The words settled between them like stones in water. Honest. Weighty. Eli looked down at the dirt between his boots. I've lived quiet for a long time, Clara. Not because I don't feel things, but because feeling too much nearly broke me once. Me too, she said softly. They sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was shelter. Coralie's making stew tomorrow, he said. She asked if we'd join, said there's a pie in it for you. I'd like that, Clara replied. He stood then slowly and tipped his hat. Get some rest. You built more than a house today. When he was gone, Clara stayed on the porch watching the moon rise between bare tree limbs. She whispered the quote she'd scribbled in her notebook that morning, letting the words steady her heart. I never asked to be rescued, Clara said. I asked for a place to build, and you gave me that. Now let me build you a home worth staying in. Her fingers brushed the newly placed floorboard beneath her feet. She didn't need perfect. She didn't need guarantees. She needed truth and effort and the grit to keep going. And now she had all three. The wind picked up, rustling the tarp draped over the roofless beams. Clara pulled her shawl tighter and stood walking to the doorframe and imagining it filled in warm light, the scent of cinnamon and firewood, a table worn smooth by meals and memory. She would build it. With her hands. With her past. With the name she had reclaimed. And maybe, just maybe, with him. If you've never had roots, you learn to grow wings, but sometimes you just want a place to land. Clara stood at the edge of the small meadow behind the cabin, her boots sunk slightly into the thawing ground. The wind still carried a nip, but the scent of earth, rich, loamy, and waiting, was stronger than the cold. She inhaled deeply and closed her eyes. This land had been her battleground, her sanctuary, and maybe now, her belonging. Behind her, the walls of the cabin were finally enclosed. A roof had gone up 3 days earlier. The smell of pine and fresh tar still clung to her sleeves. It wasn't fancy. No paint, no curtains. But it held. It held through the storm that rolled in the night, after Eli first held her hand, silent and unassuming, as they stood at the foot of the stairs. She hadn't said much. He hadn't asked her to. But the quiet between them had changed. There was steadiness now, a softness in the air that hadn't been there before. She didn't know what to call it, didn't need to name it, but it breathed with them when they worked side by side. She stepped into the garden bed she'd outlined with string and flat stones. She stooped, pulling weeds that had sprung up too early, too eager for spring. Her palms pressed into the soil and her breath slowed. This was where her old life dissolved under the weight of seed and effort. A twig snapped behind her. Clara didn't turn. "You walk like a hunter," she said. Eli chuckled low. "You're the only thing I'm chasing." She smiled to herself, wiping her hands on her skirt as she stood. "What brings you out here?" He lifted a small box from behind his back. It was plain wood, the lid smoothed and worn at the edges. "I wanted to give you something." "Early," she tilted her head. "Early for what, spring or peace, whichever comes first." He held it out, and she took it cautious but curious. Opening the lid, she found packets of seeds, heirloom, labeled in a careful hand. Tomatoes, okra, string beans, lavender, marigolds. Clara blinked hard. "These were your mama's," he said. "She used to save them every year, said nothing good ever started in comfort, only dirt and patience." Clara ran her thumb over the faded writing. "She sounds like someone I would have liked. She'd have loved you. Strong women made her less lonely." Clara closed the box gently, like tucking away a heart. "Thank you, Eli. I mean that." He nodded, then pointed to the far end of the field. "I was thinking of putting a bench up on that rise, so when things get too loud, you have somewhere quiet." She turned to face the ridge. The trees opened just enough to show a strip of sky that turned gold at dusk. "I'd like that," she said. "A place to look out and remember what it took to get here." They stood together, the wind tugging at their clothes, not speaking. The silence was deeper than comfort, it was shared ground. That evening, they walked to Coralie's together for supper. The kitchen smelled of stew and cornbread, and her children were loud in the best way, sticky with jam and joy. Clara held baby Jonah for a while, her arms stiff from unfamiliar weight, but her chest full in a way she hadn't felt in years. After dinner, Clara sat on the porch swing while Eli talked with Coralie inside. The stars began to wink awake, quiet and slow. The sky seemed larger in these hills, like the world had unfolded just for her to rest beneath it. The screen door creaked. She didn't turn. "You stayed quiet all supper," he said. She nodded. "It's a lot. Being wanted, being fed, being asked how your day was, and knowing they mean it." He leaned on the porch post. "Overwhelming, comforting," she said, "and terrifying." Eli didn't rush her. He watched the trees sway. "I keep thinking," she continued, "if I let this settle, it'll get taken away. Like every other good thing." He exhaled. "If you've never had roots, you learn to grow wings, but sometimes you just want a place to land." She looked up at him. "I want that. I want the bench and the stew and the garden that takes years to bloom. I want to trust I can stay. You can." She stood, walked to him, and placed her hand over his. "Then let's stop walking around it. We don't have to name it, but I need to know you're not planning to disappear." His hand closed around hers, firm and sure. "I'm not going anywhere." The swing creaked behind them, caught in a breeze. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. They didn't speak. They didn't move, but the moment planted something deeper than comfort, stronger than hope. Later that week, Clara began clearing a second plot next to the garden. She didn't tell anyone why, but she measured it carefully. 6 feet by 3. A bed would go there. A room for someone else someday. A home within a home. Because you don't build just for the now. You build for the days that haven't arrived yet. And Clara McAllister, no just Clara now, was finally ready for those days to come. When the past knocks, it doesn't knock gently. It kicks the door open and demands to be fed. The sound of tires on gravel pulled Clara from her planting. She was bent over the lavender bed near the porch, her knees tucked into the earth, fingernails caked with soil. Spring had finally taken hold of Iron Creek, and the wind that once stung her cheeks now carried warmth. She squinted toward the road, brushing dirt from her hands onto her apron. A blue car eased its way up the drive. Not Eli's truck, not Coralie's wagon. It was newer, sleek, out of place among the dust and rust of the frontier ridge. The engine cut off. The door opened. A heel tapped the ground, sharp, impatient. A silhouette emerged. Slim, polished, and familiar in the way a thorn remembers your skin. Clara's heart climbed into her throat. Clara Jean. The voice was lacquered in charm but dry as powder, the kind of voice that lived on tight leashes and tighter secrets. Vivian. Clara stood slowly, her legs shaky. She hadn't heard that voice in 2 years. Hadn't needed to. Vivian always sent lawyers and letters. Never herself. Until now. Vivian crossed the yard with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Her tailored coat swayed untouched by the dust that clung to everything in Iron Creek. "You've built quite the homestead," she said, glancing at the cabin, like something out of a mail-order bride catalog. Clara stiffened. "What are you doing here?" Vivian tilted her head. "I came for a visit. Family should stay connected. Since when, since you've become an interest?" Vivian's gaze flicked toward the porch where a stack of lumber rested. She looked at Clara's dirt-streaked sleeves with thinly veiled distaste. "I've had calls," Vivian continued, "from people asking about our parents' estate. Seems someone's been digging through the records. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Clara met her eyes. "I'm not ashamed of looking into what was stolen from me." Vivian laughed, a brittle sound. "Stolen? Oh, Clara, please. You were never going to run the business. You never had the mind for it. You preferred books and dreams, and you preferred secrets and control." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "Don't make this ugly. It was already ugly. I just stopped pretending it was beautiful." They stood in silence for a beat, the wind shifting between them like judgment. Then Vivian stepped closer, her voice low. "Look, you've had your fun out here in the wilderness playing poor girl with the cowboy. But I came to offer you a way out." Clara crossed her arms. "I'm listening. I want you to sign off on any claims to the property. I'll pay you. Generously. Enough to start over somewhere less provincial." Clara blinked slowly. "So you're offering to buy my silence. I'm offering you dignity. You always wanted to disappear, Clara. Here's your chance. No more family ties, no more drama, just peace." Clara stared at her. At the woman who used to braid her hair before church, who held her hand the night their father didn't come home. The woman who now saw her as a liability. "You don't understand," Clara said. "I already have peace. You're the storm." Vivian's jaw clenched. "Think very carefully before you refuse me. I already did. Years ago." Clara turned, walked to the porch, and opened the door. "You're not welcome here." Vivian didn't move. "Clara, go back to your glass tower, Viv. I'm done being one of your pawns." Vivian stared at her for a long moment. Then, without another word, she spun on her heel, walked back to the car, and drove off, kicking up dust that hung in the air like ash. Clara stood on the porch, her hand still on the doorknob, breath shallow. The past hadn't just knocked. It had threatened to rip the hinges off. That night, Eli found her on the porch bench, the seed box unopened beside her. "You're quiet," he said. She nodded. He sat beside her, waited. Vivian came, she said. His head turned sharply. What did she want? Control, power, her version of peace. Eli's eyes hardened. "Did she threaten you? She offered me money. To go away." He frowned. "And you said I said no." She leaned into him, weary and weightless at the same time. "I'm not afraid of her anymore, Eli. But I am afraid of what comes next. She doesn't let things go." Eli took her hand. "Then we don't either." She let her head fall to his shoulder. "She'll come back. Then we'll be ready." Clara looked out at the land. Her land. The lavender patch. The slow-growing corn. The unfinished fence. None of it perfect, but all of it hers. She wouldn't run, not this time, because wings might have carried her here. But roots were what would keep her standing. The truth doesn't just set you free, it rattles the chains of every lie that ever held you. Clara stood in front of the town records office, her hand resting on the weathered brass handle heart, clattering against her ribs like a spooked colt. Morning sun gleamed off the frosted windows, and somewhere down the street the bakery bell chimed ordinary life marching on, as if nothing had ever been stolen from her. But everything had. Behind this door was the paper trail, the ledger of theft, the lie carved into law when Vivian and their late uncle quietly swept her inheritance under the rug and handed it to someone else, Vivian, the chosen one. Clara hadn't understood the depth of it back then. She just remembered being 20, standing beside her mother's casket, and realizing the will had been changed without her consent. Today, she would see the original. She pushed the door open and stepped into the musty room where rows of file cabinets stood like quiet sentries. Help You Miss the clerk behind the desk was elderly with silver hair swept back and bifocals perched halfway down his nose. Clara swallowed. "I'm here to look at the Langford estate records. Marion Langford, my mother." He studied her a moment, then gave a slow nod. "You're Clara, then. Thought I recognized the eyes. You knew her long time ago. Good woman, real sharp." His words scraped something tender in her chest. "She didn't deserve what happened," Clara said quietly. "No, she didn't." He stood creaking as he moved toward a back room. "You wait right here." The silence swelled. Clara's fingers tapped the counter. She counted her breaths. When the clerk returned, he carried a manila folder thick with dust and time. He laid it before her. "There's your truth." Clara's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was the will, her mother's original signature, before the mysterious revision. There was a handwritten letter, too, folded in the back, dated 2 weeks before her mother's passing. Clara unfolded it slowly, as if the paper might crumble under the weight of memory. "Dearest Clara, if you're reading this, it means something's gone wrong. I fear Vivian and your uncle have plans for the estate, and I don't know who I can trust anymore. I've asked Mr. Tiller to keep the original on file just in case. You were always the one who stayed behind, who listened, who loved without needing anything in return. This land was meant to be yours, not because it's fair, but because you would do right by it. Don't let them take that from you. Love always." Mama Clara blinked hard. The words blurred not from time but from tears. The clerk waited. "May I make a copy?" she whispered. He nodded. "You take what you need. This place has seen enough lies." Back at the cabin, the light was slanting through the kitchen window when Eli returned. He found Clara seated at the table, the documents spread before her like puzzle pieces she was finally ready to put together. "I found it," she said, voice steady. "The original will. Her letter. Proof." Eli exhaled. "You're sure she meant for me to have it? She knew they'd bury it." He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "What are you thinking?" Clara looked up. "I'm thinking it's time to stop surviving and start reclaiming." Eli nodded slowly. "Then we'll back you, whatever comes." That afternoon, Clara called a lawyer in Bozeman, the same one who had once offered quiet advice after her father's estate passed through Vivian's hands. He agreed to meet the next day. Clara spent the evening walking the property, the familiar crunch of gravel underfoot grounding her. The lavender rose had begun to stretch with new life, and the baby apricot trees showed tight green buds. Life didn't pause for legal battles or broken trusts, but she paused before the windmill. Its arms turned gently in the breeze, creaking like an old hymn. She remembered the day she'd watched her father fix the gears with oil-stained hands. He'd stood tall, then proud and unbending, the kind of man who would have hated what the family became after he passed. That night, she dreamt of her mother's voice, not a whisper, a hymn, a warning, a promise. The next day, Clara stepped into the lawyer's office with Eli beside her, and the letter folded neatly inside her satchel. The attorney, a patient man with tired eyes and the posture of someone who had fought many long wars in courtrooms, skimmed the document and let out a slow whistle. This, he said, tapping the edge of the will, could overturn the whole thing. Clara met his gaze. "That's what I came for. It won't be easy. Vivian's made connections. She'll stall, delay, smear. Are you prepared for that? I've already lived through the worst of her." He nodded. "Then let's begin." As they signed papers and formalized the challenge, Clara felt something uncoil inside her. Not just anger, not just grief, power. Not the kind that trampled others, but the kind that rooted deep and held fast. The kind her mother saw in her. The kind that couldn't be bought. That evening, as Eli drove them home, Clara stared out at the hills rolling under the dusk light. "She's going to fight," Eli said softly. Clara nodded. "So will I." He reached over, took her hand, warm and firm. They turned onto the gravel path that led to the cabin. And waiting near the porch, standing with arms crossed and a long coat trailing in the wind, was Vivian. Again. But this time Clara didn't flinch. She opened the truck door, stepped down into the dirt that belonged to her, and walked forward. Vivian's mouth was tight. "So it's war then?" Clara didn't smile. "No, it's truth." Vivian's voice dropped a hiss meant only for her. "You think that letter will protect you?" Clara said. "But it'll expose you." Vivian's eyes flicked past her to Eli, who was now approaching slowly, silent and watchful. "I won't let you ruin what I've built," Vivian said. Clara's voice was calm. "You already did. I'm just taking it back." Vivian turned sharply, heels clicking, and disappeared into her car. As the taillights vanished into the dusk, Clara let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She wasn't chasing ghosts anymore. She was dragging them into the light. Sometimes it's not the land that needs reclaiming, it's the soul that forgot who it belonged to. Snow had dusted the mountaintops overnight, leaving a powdery crown across the ridges. The cold came in low and steady through the trees, wrapping the Langford land in hush. But inside Clara's heart, it wasn't quiet. The old fears had started to rise again, crawling up from the roots. The kind that whispered she was too late, that she was still the unwanted daughter in a family of takers. That winning in court didn't mean winning in truth. The cabin was warm, the fire low but steady. Eli had made coffee, and its scent filled the air like comfort. He stood in the kitchen watching her from across the table, arms crossed over his chest. "You haven't said a word," he said softly. Clara kept her eyes on the folded paper in front of her. A letter not from her mother this time, but from Vivian's attorney. An offer. A settlement. "She wants to end it quietly," Clara murmured. "She's offering 50% of the land, and to cover my legal fees. Says it's generous." Eli scoffed. "It's hush money," Clara nodded. "She's scared this will go public. She should be." Clara's fingers moved across the paper almost absently. "I never wanted all of it. Just what was fair. What Mama left. You still don't have to fight. You can take it, walk away. Build something new on what's left." Clara looked up. "And leave the lie standing." He said nothing. "I thought reclaiming this land would fix something in me." She went on, her voice low. "But the more I dig, the more I realize it's not just about land. It's about who I am without their voices in my head." Eli pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. "You don't owe them anything. Not even silence." She let the paper fall to the table. "I'm not settling. If I lose, I'll lose standing on truth." He reached for her hand, gave it a quiet squeeze. "Then I'll stand beside you." The hearing was set for 2 weeks later. In Bozeman. Small courtroom, no jury. Just a judge, some files, and the clatter of lawyers moving through a dance they'd done 100 times before. Clara wore her mother's locket to the hearing. Inside it was a tiny photo of the farm from years ago. The lavender rose still new. The barn still painted red. Her mother's dream. Her father's work-worn boots sitting by the porch in the background. Vivian was already seated when Clara entered the courtroom, flanked by 2 attorneys. She wore black, her hair pulled back so tight, it looked like a mask. Clara took her seat beside her own lawyer and didn't look away. She was done with flinching. The judge was fair, stern, uninterested in family drama. He asked for evidence, asked for truth. Clara's lawyer laid out the paper trail when the will was changed, who had access, how the timing overlapped with her mother's sudden illness and uncle's manipulations. The original will. The letter. The affidavit from the old clerk who had stored it. Vivian's team countered with language legal, sterile, bloodless. They tried to paint Clara as unstable, emotional, unfit to manage the land, even if it had been meant for her. Clara didn't speak until the very end. But when the judge allowed her a final statement, she stood, heart-pounding, voice steady. "My mother wasn't perfect, but she loved this land. She loved what it meant. She wanted someone to tend it, not just own it. Someone who remembered the smell of lilacs by the porch, who watched the sun rise behind the barn while shelling peas in her lap. That was me." She paused, let her eyes rest on Vivian. She changed the will when she was sick, when people around her were making choices for her. I think she felt cornered, but she left behind a letter because she still believed someone might listen. She lifted the letter gently from the folder. "I'm listening." The judge took everything under advisement, promised a decision in a week. Clara stepped out of the courthouse into gray light and sharp wind, but her lungs felt clearer than they had in years. Eli was waiting by the truck. He handed her a thermos. "Tea. Chamomile." She smiled. "You're starting to sound like my mother." She must have been smart. She was. That night back at the cabin, they didn't talk much. Clara walked the fields alone, the frost starting to bite the lavender stems, the earth going to sleep. She paused by the windmill again, its shadow long across the dirt. The blades turned slowly. She pressed her hand to the post, closed her eyes. Sometimes it's not the land that needs reclaiming, it's the soul that forgot who it belonged to. She whispered the words like a prayer, like a tether. The wind picked up sharp and dry, and she felt something shift inside. Not an ending. Not yet. But no longer lost. The next morning brought a letter from Vivian. No lawyers this time, just her handwriting stiff and small. Clara, I won't pretend to understand why you're doing this. I still think you're wrong. But something about that courtroom. I saw her in you, not just Mama, the girl you used to be. If you win, I won't fight the appeal. Do what you want with the land. Just know I'm not the villain in my own story. Vivian Clara folded the letter, unsure what to feel, but she knew what to do. She walked out to the barn and ran her fingers across the old planks. Dust rose in streaks. Inside, the light filtered through cracks like golden slats across the floor. There was work to do, land to mend, a soul to root. Whatever came next, she was no longer the girl left behind. She was the woman coming home. The educational lesson learned from this story is that dignity is not something others grant us. It's something we quietly reclaim by telling the truth and standing where we belong. Life may ask us even late in the journey to face old wounds or family betrayals, but doing so can free the heart in ways silence never could. Healing doesn't always come from winning or proving others wrong. It often comes from building something steady with our own hands and choosing peace without running. And sometimes the greatest strength is allowing ourselves to be seen not as we were broken, but as we are still becoming.